Honourable members, please remain standing for the playing of God Save the Queen.
God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen. God save the Queen. Send her victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the Queen.
Please be seated.
Introduction of visitors. Introduction of guests.
Honourable members, we have a few guests joining us today. Joining us in my gallery is a guest of mine, Ms. Lisa Haggerty. Lisa is the co-chair of the Métis Women's Council on Economic Security and the Alberta Joint Working Group on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Also joining us in the Speaker's Gallery is a close personal friend of mine, Mr. Kenny Trenton. Honourable members, also joining us, guests of the member for Edmonton-Glenora, Andrew and Ingrid Strange, and Kyle Hamilton. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, there's a sense of déjà vu in Alberta. The Premier, after spending weeks telling Albertans to follow the rules, that they should skip seeing their friends and families and put off weddings and funerals for the greater good, is trapped in his own hypocrisy. And then there's Christmas, when the Premier told Albertans to stay home to save lives. He secretly signed off on vacations to Hawaii, London, Vegas, Phoenix for his top staff, ministers and MLAs. And yesterday, one day after the Premier told people that dining was limited to 4 people, he threw himself an 8-person whiskey party on the roof of the Sky Palace. Albertans are rightly upset about the weak, waffling, hypocritical responses coming from this least trusted and least popular Premier in all of Canada. And since the Premier and the UCP have not shown any interest in listening to what Albertans think, I'll briefly tell you what they're thinking. Dr. Markland, an ICU doctor, stated, quote, "As I sit in the hospital cafeteria at a table alone because those are the rules, my rage is replaced with a clear understanding of why the pandemic has been handled so poorly by our government. It has never affected them. There is no skin in the game." Professor Dwayne Brett said, quote, "It's simple. They either violated the patio dining restriction or they violated the outdoor social gathering." Quote, "It does not make any sense." Those are the words of the Alberta Hospitality Association. The Premier likes to say, "Do as I say, not as I do," said one Albertan interviewed by media yesterday. Another Albertan quoted said, "We know, as a picture shows, that they're just kind of doing their own thing." This is not the first time this government has hypocritically put their own fun ahead of the public interest of Alberta. The Premier spent tens of thousands of dollars flying his friends around Stampede. The Premier gave his blessing to his caucus to jet off while Albertans were forced to Christmas alone. Albertans are sick and tired of hearing this Premier claim that we're all in this together for one simple reason. For this Premier, his closest allies, and that statement has never been true.
The honourable member for Banff-Kananaskis.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Tuesday in question period, the opposition leader claimed that the NDP had boosted long weekend enforcement with more than 300 new officers when they were in government. Well, fact check, how many did they actually hire? 14 in their entire term. She was only off by 286. Mr. Speaker, the NDP didn't want to increase enforcement and they didn't want to increase access to our great outdoors. They tried to shut it down. Our government is committed to protecting and investing in our parks and public lands so future generations can enjoy them. That's why the new Kananaskis Conservation Pass will invest fees directly back into conservation, services, and facilities in Alberta's most beautiful mountain parks. That's why we're hiring 20 new conservation officers this year, more than the NDP hired in their full 4-year term, along with 20 new public lands employees and 10 new frontline park staff. That's why we're planning to upgrade the Canmore Nordic Centre. That's why we are providing funds to improve parking so sensitive lands are not damaged by those stopping to see the incredible views in Alberta. That's why we are investing more than $300 million in capital, operating, and grant dollars to support responsible outdoor recreation, on top of $25 million for Alberta's first wildlife overpass outside of a national park. That's why we commissioned Alberta's first ever scientific study on the grizzly bear population to help us better manage this species. That's why we invested $10 million to conserve 55,000 acres of environmentally sensitive land. And that's why we released a 90-page guide to help Albertans recreate safely in our backcountry. And that's just the beginning. Mr. Speaker, Alberta's Conservative government has done more to protect and support access to our majestic parks and public lands in the past 2 years than our opposition did in their full 4 years before it. The numbers don't lie, Mr. Speaker. The NDP talk, but this government takes action.
The honourable member for Banff-Kananaskis, for Brooks Medicine Hat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For far too long, Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIAS+ have experienced the effects of oppression throughout their lives. This suffering has contributed to the disproportionately high levels of violence committed against them. In 2019, the report on the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was released and comprised of testimonies of over 2,300 family members, survivors of violence, experts, and knowledge keepers. Today, in response to that final report, the National Action Plan was released, a collaboration between federal and provincial government and communities to address the calls to justice in the final report. In March of 2020, this government established the Alberta Joint Working Group on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, intending to achieve justice for those missing and striving to ensure that these injustices do not continue. The committee has taken the time to engage with Indigenous people to support Indigenous-led and community-centred solutions. Alberta's government is committed to listening to the concerns of Indigenous communities and implementing the best fit solutions to align with the path of reconciliation. This government also created a contribution agreement with the Institute to the Advancement of Aboriginal Women to ensure that Indigenous women can access advocacy programs and services. We also established the Human Trafficking Task Force. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the government introduced and passed legislation such as Clare's Law, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act, so that those at risk of domestic violence can find out if their intimate partner has a history of abuse. Every individual abused, missing, or murdered was someone's sister, daughter, friend, and so much more, Mr. Speaker, and their lives mattered. Putting an end to the violence that so many of these people face is important to stop the effects of intergenerational trauma to allow Indigenous communities to truly thrive in the future. We are aware that there is so much work that needs to be done. However, this government envisions a province where Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA+ people are treated equitably and can live safely in Alberta, free from the fear of being subjected to violence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Decore.
In 2014, the people of Alberta watched former Premier Alison Redford try to defend the secret construction of a luxury apartment in the federal building. Albertans were disgusted by the entitlement, the arrogance, and soon after they voted to end a 44-year Conservative run as government. The Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, who was part of the PC caucus who initially defended that Premier, should remember it well. Current Minister of Transportation and Municipal Affairs should remember that time well too. He always claimed he spoke out against using the space, that he was on the right side of this terrible PC legacy. Where is that voice now? Because as it turns out, no lessons have been learned, no wisdom has been passed along, even from members of the government who face so much backlash from Albertans. A mere 7 years later, yet another Conservative government is trying to defend the use of the same space for hosting a dinner that violated public health rules. More things changed, the more they look the same. Albertans expect their leaders to walk their talk. They don't expect their leaders to tell them to tighten their belts while they're secretly constructing a luxury penthouse. They don't expect their leaders to tell them to stay home when they sip whiskey with 7 friends while taking in a beautiful view of the city. The Premier promised to be a servant leader, only now it's clear that what he meant by that is he expected to be served whiskey, wine, sparkling water on a linen tablecloth. Albertans throughout the last Premier and party who abused their trust and partied in the Sky Palace. Albertans have a low tolerance for leaders that abuse their trust. Albertans don't like this Premier, they don't trust this Premier, they don't trust the Health Minister. I have a warning for the UCP MLAs who are watching their poll numbers drop and their fundraising dry up. As Premier parties in the Sky Palace while Albertans can't see their families, they judge you for your silence. And in 2 years, when Alberta voters make their voices clear on the actions of the Premier, his ministers, and his MLAs, you won't be able to ignore that message.
The honourable member for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been just over 2 years since our government came into power, and it has been an experience like no other. I'm proud to represent my incredible constituents of Spruce Grove and Stony Plain every day and to advocate on behalf of their interested cabinet and the Premier. And although the last year has been difficult for everyone in Spruce Grove and Stony Plain, I am proud of the work this government has done to improve our communities and to get us through the economic hardships of this pandemic. Last year, we saw a historical designation of Spruce Grove's Grain Elevator and the Agricultural Society as a provincial historical resource, along with a fantastic $4.25 million investment to expand Spruce Grove's commercial and industrial fiber optic network. Nonprofits in our communities have received mental health grants, which have helped many struggling with mental illness during this difficult year. Cultural grants have gone to upgrade church and sports facilities, along with assisting some nonprofits with operating costs. And our government has dedicated millions in funding to capital projects such as the Stony Plain Central School Replacement Project, which will begin construction soon, and the Woodhaven Modernization Project, which will be completed this year. Prescott Elementary School will also finally get a playground, which was overlooked by the previous government. And it was recently announced that we will be getting a new starter Francophone school, which will help hundreds of families who currently travel to St. Albert or Edmonton for their children's education. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have gone to Westview Health Centre in Stony Plain to make the hospital accessible to patients requiring bariatric services. And millions have gone to new senior housing projects, along with revitalization of existing facilities. Mr. Speaker, so much has happened in these last 2 years, and there's much more to look forward to, and I will continue to advocate for more capital and social program spending for our communities of Spruce Grove and Stony Plain in the years ahead. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton, Glenora.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans reject the draft curriculum, and this rejection began the day before the government launched their terrible curriculum, when Elder Betty rightfully refused to praise the government's failed attempt. Albertans started organizing and speaking out the following day. The Métis Nation and Treaty 6 were first to call on the government to pull the draft, as it didn't fulfill the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Then there were school boards, 56 public, Catholic, and Francophone boards across this province who've rejected the draft curriculum and refused to pilot any of it. Francophone and Japanese Albertan organizations have also publicly rejected the curriculum, and most recently, the only living direct line family member of a woman who this government is trying to shoehorn into their terrible curriculum has said she doesn't consent to it. More than 40,000 people have signed the online petition calling on the government to pull their terrible draft. Over 41,000 Albertans have joined a Facebook group titled Albertans Reject the Curriculum Draft. 7 volunteers who are administrators and moderators are engaged in this dynamic Facebook page. Thousands of lawn signs are being planted across the province. And when their team decided to start a formal petition for tabling in this place, 2,306 people volunteered to collect signatures. And then they mailed them back. From every day for the 2 weeks that they were mailed in, the mailbox was overflowing. Albertans from 92 different communities across the province, including Red Deer, Grand Prairie, High River, Beaver County, Cochrane, Rimbey, Kitscoty, Fort McMurray, Pitcher Butte, Didsbury, Vulcan, 11,827 Albertans have signed the formal petition, which I will table later today. Each and every signature was counted and recounted by a volunteer, a mom who cares about her kids and Alberta's future. I'm honored by her work, and I will honor it by fighting for this terrible draft to be removed. Alberta's kids deserve better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Peace River has risen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today because I'm so proud of the work this government has done. Albertans have sacrificed so much to get to the point where as early as June 24th, Alberta will be open for summer and open for good. Mr. Speaker, my constituents who sacrificed, Albertans across the province, should revel in the fact that we now can do everything that we've been longing for All of our businesses are going to be open, Mr. Speaker. Hockey games, kids' sports are going to be open. Music festivals in the great city of Edmonton are going to be open again. Restaurants, in-person dining, inside and out. Visiting your grandparents, Mr. Speaker. Please hold your families tight when you get a chance to see them again. In-home visits with friends, swimming pools and parties for kids all summer will be happening. Rodeos, Mr. Speaker, I know the Honourable Minister of Environment and Parks will be happy to see that. We have movie theaters, one of my favourite pastimes. We can jam in there as many as possible, as much as we like, as the big blockbusters are coming out this summer, Mr. Speaker. Gyms will be open for those who are fitness inclined. I've been hitting far too many burgers this year, so I might have to do some of that myself. And importantly, Mr. Speaker, our weddings, our baptisms, church worship, our family reunions, they're going to be open, Mr. Speaker, because Alberta is open for the summer and open for good. And I'm so very proud of the work this government has done to be the fastest province opening, Mr. Speaker, and doing it in the best possible way so we can have the greatest summer ever. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Airdrie Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize an organization in my constituency that is doing amazing work for Canadian veterans and first responders who have been diagnosed with PTSD. Veteran Hunters Canada is a non-profit, volunteer-led organization that provides opportunities for veterans and first responders to connect with like-minded people. They organize regular competitions, meetups, and hunting retreats for their members, which allow them to spend time honing their skills in the great outdoors while inspiring and supporting their peers. Their members truly value the importance of camaraderie and friendship while on the path to recovery. This type of interactive participation makes a huge difference to those whose lives have been affected by PTSD, and I am proud of the work they are doing to support Canadians who have risked their lives for the benefit of others. Veteran Hunters was founded by Todd Heisey, who launched the organization in 2018 after serving as an officer with the Canadian Armed Forces for over 20 years. Hunting and spending time in nature were key factors in Todd's personal recovery, so he looked for ways to share those experiences and provide opportunity to others recovering from PTSD, and Veteran Hunters was born. Recently, they received a $50,000 grant from the Alberta government, which will help cover fees, increase excursion activities, and improve capacity for new members. Mr. Speaker, I cannot think of a more deserving recipient of this grant. They are a one-of-a-kind organization that provides unique support to over 120 brave Albertans. It is my pleasure to recognize the Veteran Hunters and the work they do, and I encourage everyone to visit their website at theveteranhunters.com and consider making a donation or offering supports to this worthy organization. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lesser Slave Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in commemoration of the 32nd anniversary of the brutal end of the Tiananmen Square massacre. After a month and a half of peaceful protests, hunger strikes, and public sit-ins with the goal of securing basic freedoms and democratic reforms, then-President Deng Xiaoping and Premier Li Peng enforced martial law on June 3, 1989, leading to the inexcusable deaths of thousands. Today, the massacre is one of the most heavily censored topics in China, and speaking about it is seen as an act of questioning the legitimacy of the Communist Party of China. Just 2 days ago, it was reported that the Tiananmen Square Museum in Hong Kong has been forced to close. The very rights that these protesters stood up and attempted to obtain over 30 years ago are still indefensibly not given to every Chinese citizen. It is events like these that must remind us of how lucky we are to be Canadian and to be Albertan. There is always room for better in our society, but we are among the most fortunate global citizens to have broad freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of religion, and a strong and fair democratic system. The COVID-19 pandemic resulted in many changes to our lives, and indeed, some of our freedoms we took for granted were put on pause. But the government has been accountable to the people, to the rule of law, and as we move out of the pandemic, our freedoms are returning. So many do not enjoy the same privilege. I am a strong believer in defending basic human rights at home and abroad, and anniversaries like this are key to remembering what is at stake. We must never let our own governments infringe on our freedoms like the federal government has tried to do with their new internet regulations with Bill C-10, and we must stand up and protect our rights across the globe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the time is 1:50 and it is oral question period. And the honourable member for Edmonton Glenora has the call.
We'll have to continue to show Albertans that we've learned the lesson, that we've heard them, and that we have to rebuild a culture of discipline and humility. That was what the current Premier said in January when his colleagues and senior staff were caught travelling internationally when everyone else was told to stay home. When most Albertans think about discipline and humility, they don't think about white tablecloths of 40 of Jameson, liters upon liters of wine and San Pellegrino on the roof of the Sky Palace. Will the Premier show humility today, admit that he broke the public health orders, and apologize?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, no, because I did no such thing, Mr. Speaker. On Tuesday, we moved forward with Stage 1 of Alberta's Open for Summer plan, which included expanding outdoor gatherings to a maximum of 10 people. We had a business dinner, which we moved outside with 6 people that was fully rule compliant, Mr. Speaker. And what the NDP should be doing is joining us in encouraging people to move things outside within the numerical numbers. It's 10 this week. A week from now, at Phase 2, we'll move to a 20-person maximum gathering. And at the end of June, we're on track to move it to an unlimited outdoor gathering, Mr. Speaker. Let's embrace Alberta summer.
The Honourable member.
When the Premier gloats about the best summer ever, most Albertans hope that means their kids get to go camping, that they can visit the dinosaurs in Drumheller, and finally give Grandma that long-awaited hug. The Premier seems to think his best summer ever gets to start way before everybody else's on the roof of the Sky Palace with bottles of booze and absolutely no rules being followed. We know he invited his 3 best buds from Cabinet. Albertans keep asking us who the other 4 people who were there breaking the rules. Will the Premier tell this House who they were? Why is he protecting them? Why won't he take responsibility?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, what's really going on, Mr. Speaker, is the NDP doesn't want to open Alberta. They've always wanted a hard lockdown. They always wanted the schools closed. And now they're opposed to the very modest measure of allowing 10 people to gather outdoors for social gatherings. It's explicitly what the rule is, Mr. Speaker. Care was taken to the alternative is to have meetings like that indoors. By moving things outdoors, we dramatically reduce the prospect of viral transmission. That's why we don't just permit, but get this, Mr. Speaker, we actively encourage Albertans to move to outdoor social gatherings as long as it's fewer than 10 people.
Well, member for Edmonton Glenora.
The Premier broke the rules. He knows it because he wrote the rules. He says we're all in this together. But as he said this many times before, the truth is that there's 2 sets of rules. One set for everybody else, and one set for those who hop on 2 elevators, ride to the 11th floor of the federal building, bring the Premier a few bottles of their finest booze. They have a different set of rules, Premier. So why won't the Premier admit that we're not all in this together? Because clearly when he's in charge, that's never been true.
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, is the member for Edmonton Glenora telling me that she would never joined the former Premier on the Premier's terrace in the legislature or in the federal building? Because I'm told that they socialized quite frequently there, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's the first time I've heard of, Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member that Jameson's is, it's a nice Irish whiskey, but it's not the finest. It's a budget liquor, Mr. Speaker. We patronized at our own personal expense local restaurants to support them in their takeout enterprise and followed all of the rules carefully, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable member for Edmonton Glenora.
The man of the people has sure come a long way from the blue pickup and the rented motorhome that he didn't sleep in to say that Jameson's isn't a quality whiskey and he was just having a quiet, cheap drink on the roof of the Sky Palace, the most hated palace in all of Alberta. On April 8th, the Canadian press reporter Dean Bennett asked the current Premier, quote, "If anybody in your caucus breaks the health rules or endorses others to do so, will you kick them out of caucus?" The Premier said, yes, and yes. Does the Premier still stand by that comment, or has he changed his mind?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, here's the rule. Up to 10 Albertans are not only permitted but encouraged to do outdoor social gatherings, to embrace the Alberta summer. I know the NDP doesn't want us to have an open summer, but come hell or high water, we are going to have an open summer, and it started with Phase 1. And I want to make a confession, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, I joined a couple of friends for an outdoor picnic lunch. We patronized a great Calgary restaurant, a great Greek restaurant, Mr. Speaker. And I'll tell you this, we were out there with the public, like everyone else, having a great Alberta time complying with the rules.
The honourable member for Edmonton Glenora.
Quote, vote, there are over 1 million people who voted for us because we campaigned on hard work and humility. And some folks on our team forgot about that last part. It's going to take us time to be able to earn back the trust, earn back the credibility, and show people that humility is still an important part of our government, our caucus, and our party. To the Premier, this was a member of your cabinet after the Aloha Gate scandal broke who said that humility was important to show. Who said this? And did you show any humility on the balcony of the Sky Palace?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the member hasn't answered my question. How often did she attend social functions on that same balcony? How often did she attend functions of the Premier's balcony here in the legislature, or the balcony on the other side? Mr. Speaker, the hypocrisy from the NDP is so thick you can't cut it with a knife. Mr. Speaker, I want to make another confession. Later today, I am going to be attending with a friend a backyard barbecue. Weather permitting, Mr. Speaker, a couple of friends gathered around a barbecue outdoors safely and rule compliant, and I hope many hundreds of thousands of Albertans do exactly the same thing.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Glenora.
For the record, Premier, that was your health minister, the man you drank a 40 of Jameson with on the roof of the most hated palace in the province, in breach of public health orders on Tuesday night. With that kind of arrogant disrespect to the people of this province and what the Premier's just doubled down on in this House, what gives the health minister the right to be a minister? And better yet, what gives the Premier the right to govern?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, a majority election mandate, Mr. Speaker. And in this respect, the full compliance with the rules. What does the member not understand about the invitation, the encouragement that up to 10 people may socialize outdoors? Apparently, the member would prefer that we have a business discussion indoors where chances of transmission are radically higher. That is why we encourage outdoor social functions with, of course, common sense precautions to be taken. Mr. Speaker, another revelation this weekend, I'll be at an outdoor patio restaurant with one of my close designated contacts supporting the restaurant industry.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Premier dined out on the terrace of the Sky Palace, he did so in flagrant violation of the public health orders. On June 1st, the Premier tweeted and reminded Albertans, and I quote, "distancing and masking requirements remain in effect," end quote. But hours later, there he was breaking the rules with members of his cabinet, including the Minister of Health. If this Premier is doing everything possible, it's like he is, to show off just how elite he is, how the rules don't apply to him or his caucus. Did the Premier receive a personal exemption from Dr. Hinshaw for his Sky Palace dinner? Or did he just believe he's above the rules that everyday Albertans have been continuing to follow?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, 6 Albertans don't require anybody's approval or any exemption to engage in an outdoor gathering. The rules explicitly permit that. Perhaps the NDP has not followed closely the phase 1 of Alberta's Open for Summer plan. Mr. Speaker, I was happy to be able to move an planned indoor meeting outdoors massively to reduce the risk of transmission in full compliance with the phase 1 rules. And I know they might be afraid of doing so, but I would encourage the NDP to embrace the Alberta summer as long as they keep it to under 10 people.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the rules that took effect June 1st are crystal clear. Albertans can read them in black and white. CMOH Order 30/2021 states, and I quote, "Any person who attends a private social gathering at an outdoor, public, or private place must maintain a minimum physical distance of 2 meters from any other person attending that gathering unless the person is a member of their household." There's no ambiguity there. It's the rules this Premier imposed on Albertans. So to the purported leader of the province, why doesn't CMOH Order 30/2021 apply to your wine and whiskey dinner on the terrace of the Sky Palace with your government elite?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, let me ask that member. Has he ever been on that terrace with the former Premier? Has he ever enjoyed hospitality there or the other Premier's terrace? I see a lot of people nodding. Will he confirm that, Mr. Speaker? Did he enjoy? Because is this just some kind of gross political hypocrisy? With respect to the rules, Mr. Speaker, we made every reasonable effort to be physically distanced outdoors rather than doing an indoor meeting, fully compliant with the rules, Mr. Speaker, and we encourage all Albertans to get out there, enjoy the summer as we continue to relax the public health measures.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker. As this Premier and his ministers sat throwing back 4 bottles of wine and a 40 of whiskey, they were looking down on dozens of local businesses who are doing the right thing and following the public health orders. They do so at a cost to their bottom line, their income and jobs for their employees. The only cost to this Premier and his ministers would have been some minor inconvenience, a small concession of their personal privilege. Is this Premier so entitled, so arrogant, that he thinks such a small sacrifice was too much for him to bear, when Albertans down here on the ground have been willing to do the right thing and sacrifice so much more?
The Honourable the Premier.
Contrary to what the member just said, Mr. Speaker, that the dinner was at personal expense. And secondly, we were supporting local Alberta business with takeout. Mr. Speaker, thirdly, will the member confirm, I'll ask him a second time, will he confirm whether he has ever engaged in socializing on the same terrace? He refers to it as a Sky Palace terrace. How often was he there? How often was he on the other Premier's terrace, Mr. Speaker? How often did he do what he's criticizing people for doing, which is going outside, following the rules to enjoy Alberta summer?
The Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall is next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last November, this Premier had a message for COVID-19 rule breakers. He said, knock it off. Clearly, there was a message that didn't apply to the UCP cabinet, as the Premier and 3 of his ministers sat maskless with their bottles of whiskey and wine in clear violation of public health order on Tuesday night. Premier, my questions are simple to start. Will the Premier and all members of the UCP cabinet knock it off themselves and commit to not breaking the public health orders again? We are still in a pandemic and people are still getting sick.
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the premise of the question is completely misleading because I have always taken care to follow the public health measures for the past 16 months. I won't say I've batted 1,000. I think a couple times I forgot a mask, getting into an elevator and things like that, like most people have. But I can certainly tell the member that we were purposefully, deliberately, and carefully compliant with the rules with an outdoor gathering of 6 people. When outdoor gatherings of 10 people are permitted, Mr. Speaker, I ask the NDP to stop telling Albertans not to embrace the newfound freedom in the Open for Summer plan.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall.
Only a few short weeks ago, the Minister of Justice said, and I quote, "It's becoming clear that there are small few who refuse to comply with reasonable and legitimate public health orders," end quote. Alberta looks to its leader to set an example, and when they see the Premier and his friends partying with no mask, no distancing, and facing no consequences, some will use this as a permission to break the rules themselves. Can the Minister of Justice confirm if the Sky Palace patio party is being investigated for breaching the public health order? And if it's not, why not?
The Honourable the Premier.
Because they weren't breached, Mr. Speaker, I will refer the Honourable Member to the Alberta Health Services website with respect to the Open for Summer plan. It says the following, and I quote, effective June 1st, unless stated otherwise, outdoor social gatherings up to 10 people are permitted. Mr. Speaker, we had 6 people. That's 4 fewer than 10 people. Mr. Speaker, the same rules apply to everyone. And Mr. Speaker, even members of the legislature, when they are meeting for business, are allowed to follow the rules.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall.
This Premier wrote the rules, he lectured people to follow the rules, and many Albertans have been fined for not following the rules. The Premier reminded Albertans on social media earlier Tuesday that patio dining was limited to 4 people, and then hours later he held an illegal dinner with 8 people. The Premier should be fined, and so should everyone else in attendance. Will the Premier, the Health Minister, the Finance Minister, and the House Leader commit to paying $2,000 fine for breaching the public health order? You all owe Albertans $8,000 and an apology.
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, if said outside this place, that would be considered defamatory, Mr. Speaker. When he talks about the public health order with respect to restaurants, I assure the member that my office is not a restaurant. It says that for restaurants, may at outdoor patios accommodate up to 4 household members. Mr. Speaker, this was an outdoor social gathering, fully compliant with the rules, physically distanced, The alternative would be to meet indoors. We are encouraging Albertans with numbers of 10 or less to move outdoors. We ask the NDP to get with the program of the Open for Summer program.
The honourable member for Calgary West is next.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite what the NDP and the opposition, should I say, Alberta is on the economic rebound. And there are stories to prove it. Yesterday, we saw great news from Alberta's economy. Emphasis, an India-based tech company, is establishing their Canadian headquarters here in Calgary. This is the second major international firm to do so, in collaboration with Invest Alberta. This means more jobs and more economic diversification. So to the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, what can you tell us about Emphasis and this announcement?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to that member for the question. Emphasis is one of the largest IT companies in the world, Mr. Speaker, with an international presence, and they chose Calgary as their Canadian headquarters, Mr. Speaker. Our tech sector in Alberta is growing and maturing rapidly, Mr. Speaker. We have national and international attention. Venture capital is continuing to grow exponentially in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. It's encouraging to see this real diversification happening right now, real time, exponential growth right here and at home.
Member for Calgary West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that these global companies can go anywhere in the world, and for them to choose Alberta for their headquarters must mean that we have distinct advantages over other areas in Canada. So Calgary is often cited as the most livable city in North America, and our government is creating the best conditions for growth. So to the same minister, what made Emphasis choose Calgary for their Canadian headquarters?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Let's put this in context for the last few months here, Mr. Speaker. We've got Emphasis. We've also got Emphasis with a 500-person new headquarters in Calgary, Mr. Speaker. We've got Roger Shaw putting 500 people for an engineering hub in Calgary that they want to go forward with, Mr. Speaker. Alberta has always been known as an entrepreneurial hub, Mr. Speaker, for a whole range of industries. Now we're getting our feet under us when it comes to the technology and innovation space, Mr. Speaker. This applies to every industry. We have a world-leading institution for AI, machine learning. University of Calgary wants to be a leader in quantum computing. Lots of opportunities ahead.
Well, member for Calgary West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We hear constantly from the opposition that we are ruining any chances of a flourishing Alberta tech sector. The minister's answer strongly indicated that the opposition is wrong, and that, in fact, the sector is growing and maturing with record levels of investment and more jobs than ever, Mr. Speaker. So, to the same minister, what does this announcement signal about the growth of the tech sector in our province?
The Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Let's put this in context, Mr. Speaker. When the NDP were in government in 2018, we had 1,200 tech companies in Alberta in 2018. Fast forward to 2020, we have over 3,000 tech companies here in Alberta, 150% growth in 2 years. And not only that, these companies are larger with more employees, more financings. On the venture capital side, first quarter of 2021, $220 million in venture capital, double the best year ever under the NDP. That was in 3 months, double their best year in 3 months.
The honourable member for Edmonton South has a question.
The Premier broke the public health orders, and it's a shame he won't admit it. I have another concern about the Sky Palace brouhaha, though. In the middle of the table during this apparently critical government meeting sat a 40 of fine Irish whiskey. That's 40 drinks of hard liquor, Jameson's for the record, with a few bottles of wine thrown in for good measure. That's a lot of booze to help make government policy. Does the Premier make it a policy to conduct government business over this many liters of alcohol, and can someone in attendance confirm that no ministers drove home after?
Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, this is getting ridiculous. We have moved forward as a province on June 1st with stage 1 of our Open for Summer plan. Obviously, the NDP are upset with us moving forward with stage 1. I anticipate they may even continue to be upset when we move forward with stage 2, and they start to see members of this caucus participating in activities that are permitted in stage 2. We will expect to see that with this behavior. Mr. Speaker, I encourage all Albertans to continue, as Premier said, to enjoy the activities that are permitted in stage 1, as many Albertans are now continuing to do.
The honourable member for Edmonton South.
Given that what Albertans are upset about is this health minister and this premier breaking the rules, and given that the premier's office claimed that no government resources were used to support the premier's dinner on the terrace, and what a dinner it was, from the photographs we can see white linens, waiters, only the best sparkling water, and of course a fair amount of booze, including some fine Irish whiskey, and given that all of this was for a working meeting of the premier's inner circle as they flaunted those public health orders, if the premier was being honest with Albertans that no public resources were used, who paid for the alcohol? Was it the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Health, the government House Leader, could they please inform who brought the white linens from their home, and please be specific?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, no waiters, no rules broken, and all of the food and the beverages were private expenses that were paid for by the people who attended.
Member for Edmonton South.
Given, Mr. Speaker, that I certainly don't have white linens as lavish as those, and given by now that most Albertans have seen the photos of the Premier and his key ministers drinking on the terrace of the Sky Palace, and given that this Premier clearly has some pretty fine taste, having gone from the big blue truck and the get-her-done rhetoric to white linens, draped ice buckets, beautifully stemmed glassware, and of course the most expensive sparkling water money can buy, we've all seen the government House Leader enjoying some of that fine Irish whiskey. But social media still has questions. If this was a government meeting, the public deserves to know. What was the bottle of red? Merlot? Shiraz? What was it?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we see again the NDP are upset that the province has moved forward with Stage 1. They're upset with the Open for Summer plan. They're upset that Alberta as a province and Albertans are anticipating and excited to move forward with the Open for Summer plan. They're upset that Albertans are embracing the plan. They're embracing Stage 1, and they're upset. They do not want that to proceed throughout this province. Mr. Speaker, no rules were broken. And Mr. Speaker, I encourage all Albertans to enjoy the Alberta summer within the confines of Stage 1, Stage 2, and Stage 3 as they occur throughout the province.
The Honourable Member, order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
Mr. Speaker, throughout the pandemic, the threat of contracting COVID-19 at the workplace has been constant for essential workers. These workers, from nurses to grocery store workers to long-term care workers to servers, have kept the economy running and caring for our loved ones. Working from home wasn't an option, so every day they showed up to support Albertans. Many of these workers contracted COVID-19 in the workplace, and as long-haul symptoms continue, many are still suffering. Workers have died. To the Minister of Labour, it is the Minister of Labour's job to protect workers. Will he agree to the presumptive coverage for COVID-19 coverage for all workers, yes or no?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for the question. Presumptive coverage. I can tell you that the sorry, looking in the wrong page here. I apologize for that. But, Mr. Speaker, there's presumptive coverage for a wide range of Albertans right now, certainly emergency service providers, firefighters, and others. I don't know if the member's plan, is there any plans for legislative changes, not that I'm aware of, but what's in place now is good.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that throughout the pandemic, essential workers who put their health and well-being on the line to protect and care for our loved ones experienced the death of patients unlike anything they've ever experienced. And this trauma is resulting in many being unable to work. And given that just over a year ago, this government took away the right to presumptive PTSD coverage, and this means these workers, nurses, who have been on the front line every single day, now have to prove they deserve WCB coverage. Will the Premier come down from his Sky Palace, recognize the impact of COVID-19 on Albertans, and support these workers?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Municipal Affairs.
Well, I could agree with one thing that the Honourable Member said, is that Alberta's healthcare workers have done more than their share. They have showed up every day and kept Albertans safe, sometimes at great personal sacrifice, and today's as good a day as any to say thank you again. I hope we all thank them every day, but the Honourable Member has reminded me I should say that today. I can tell you that we have many protections in place for our workers, including our healthcare workers, and we will forever be in their debt for the amazing job they have done throughout the COVID.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, given that while we may all feel the pandemic is coming to an end, and given that this provides hope for many, there are other Albertans who face a long and uncertain recovery. And given that these essential workers absolutely deserve a government that has their backs every single day, and given that not one single family who has lost a family member to COVID-19 due to workplace contraction should ever have to fight to prove it, will the Minister commit today to doing the right thing and support my legislation for presumptive PTSD and COVID-19 coverage for workers, or is he really going to turn his back on Albertans?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Municipal Affairs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell the honourable member that 87% of COVID-19 cases submitted to WCB have been accepted, resulting in more than $19 million paid to support workers. I can also tell the honourable member that it would be foolhardy of me to comment on legislation which I have not yet seen.
Member for Central Peace Notley.
Quote, Albertans are angry because of the terrible judgment that many in government have shown, and they are right to be angry. I heard Albertans loud and clear. After all the terrible sacrifices that people had made for 10 months, it was insulting, end quote. That was the Premier in January regarding MLA travelers, who he said had, quote, complied with legal requirements, end quote. Albertans have been kept from their families. Albertans have cancelled or delayed their weddings and been kept from funerals. Albertans have lost their businesses while this Premier hosts wining and dining sessions on his Sky Palace patio. To the Premier, did you show, quote, terrible judgment when you undermined the public health orders?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not true. The public health measures were not undermined, and they were in fact in consideration when the event was planned. So it was compliant with the public health measures that were in existence because we are, as a province, we have proceeded with stage 1, and we will soon be proceeding into stage 2, which will then allow outdoor social gatherings up to 20 people. And I would encourage all Albertans, including that member, to embrace these stages as we continue to move through them as a province and to embrace the Open for Summer plan.
Member for Central Peace Notley.
Given that, to quote the Premier, I will be working with caucus to create a culture of discipline, and that starts with ensuring that people comply not just with the letter, but also the spirit of both the public health restrictions and guidelines, end quote. And given that our current guidelines disallow gatherings moving between indoors and outdoors and require social distancing, and in a workplace, everyone must be working from home unless essential, and given that there are fewer work papers than Scotch bottles on the infamous Sky Palace dining table, to the Premier, do you really believe you can pick and choose rules from different scenarios and design a unique set of rules for yourself?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was not unique. These are public health measures that were included and considered in the planning of the event. We are now in stage 1 that allows outdoor social gatherings up to 10 people. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to discipline, as we heard a quote from the honourable member about discipline, I'm not going to be taking lessons from that member when it comes to discipline.
The Honourable Member for Central Peace Notley.
Given business owners lose while the Premier dines on catered meals, and the part of this that is most wrong is the hypocrisy and hubris, and given that, to quote the Premier, Albertans said they want there to be consequences. I heard them, and there have been serious consequences. They were right to make that demand, and that is why those responsible lost jobs, suffered demotions, end quote. And given the reports that this government instructed Alberta's formerly independent officers to crack down on high-profile rule breakers, to the Premier, when can Albertans expect AHS to crack down on you, and will you resign as Premier?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me begin by saying that I am not surprised. I am not surprised at all to hear the member say something that's untrue when it comes to COVID and what is occurring throughout the province during the pandemic. That event was not catered. We had food that was ordered at a local restaurant as takeout and brought in so that we could enjoy an outdoor social gathering with that food that was takeout food. But again, like I said, Mr. Speaker, not at all surprised to hear that member say something about COVID that is untrue.
Honourable members, the Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford is next.
When this UCP government signed its protocol agreement with the Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations, the Minister of Indigenous Relations said, quote, I'm proud to walk a path of reconciliation, quote, end quote. And he added, quote, we will work together in a spirit of respect and partnership to move forward with our shared social and economic priorities, end quote. Yesterday, we found out that this agreement has been terminated because this government has not lived up to its end. Will the minister explain how he, the Premier, and his entire government ruined the relationship with Treaty 6 First Nations so quickly?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to say we have an excellent relationship with Treaty 6. And while we're disappointed with the Confederacy of Treaty 6 Nations has desired to dissolve that historic protocol agreement, we still plan on working with Treaty 6 and continue to dialogue with them. Mr. Speaker, Treaty 6 was the first AIOC project that we put out with six Treaty 6 First Nations who actually weren't at the meeting where that was dissolved as well. And those First Nations are enjoying now a partnership with a $1.5 billion project in which they are full partners, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
given that Grand Chief Vernon Watchmaker said yesterday the decision to dissolve the protocol agreement with this terrible government was reaffirmed after the Premier made harmful comments related to the decision to change the name of Langevin School, and given that this week should have been about the victims of residential schools, including 215 who died in Kamloops, but the Premier decided to make it all about white men. And given these comments have caused harm and added to the grief being experienced by so many, will the Premier or the Minister or any member of this government actually stand in this House, do the right thing, and apologize for this Premier's terrible comment?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad the member brought up the residential school issue. I've attended 2 of the vigils out there, Mr. Speaker. Very heartbreaking event. We've had thousands, actually, of people out there, and you can see the number of shoes are growing out there. Each pair of those shoes represents somebody's family member that isn't coming home. So we take that very seriously, Mr. Speaker, and we're working right now on a plan on funding the communities to begin the process of community engagement, and we'll be providing more details as we go along.
The Honourable Member.
Given that while the vast majority of political leaders in this country are focused this week on the trauma of residential schools, efforts to find unmarked graves where victims of residential schools lay, and on real efforts to see through the calls to actions from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, but given this Premier has decided to boast about the legacy of white men, Minister, we know who John A. Macdonald is. We know what he did. Are you really trying to tell Indigenous leaders in this province that you stand behind the Premier's comments? If so, how can you possibly ever hope to repair the massive damage that's been done over the last several days?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And because it is such an important issue, we were literally the first province in Canada to fund the research into the unmarked Indigenous graves. And we have 2 ministries already fully engaged on this. Service Alberta is working hard on this as we speak. And we are working on a funding program, and the federal government has provided funding as well. And we will be the first, probably across Canada, to start the work on actually finding and
The Honourable Member for St. Albert has the call.
Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that we have to fact check in this place, but here we are. Yesterday, I asked the Premier to justify his government's removal of income support supplemental benefits. Once again, the Premier was factually incorrect when he said income supports are the most generous in Canada. Fact, income support for a single Albertan considered eligible to work, it would be the lowest in the country except for Saskatchewan. Income support for a single Albertan with a disability is also scraping the bottom in Canada, with only New Brunswick and Nova Scotia below Alberta. To the Minister, care to correct the record?
The Minister of Community and Social Services.
Thank you to the member opposite for that question and for those remarks. And she actually is correct. The income support rates are middle of the range in terms of what it's. Well, these rates also were set by the previous government by ministerial order, and certainly if there was any opportunity to increase those rates, the minister at that time should have taken that opportunity and increased those rates at that time.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert.
Given this minister knows her department changed policy on income support supplemental benefits from continuous benefit based on need to one that must meet unreasonable criteria every 3 months, given we know maximum core benefits for income support are below $900 per month and a $300 supplemental or top-up is literally the only thing preventing homelessness. To the minister, has your department prepared any plans to deal with the growing poverty and increased stress your policy changes will inflict on other supports such as acute health care, emergency shelters, prisons, food banks?
Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, this policy was put in place for a reason. You have to follow those rules. Those substantiation notes do have to be in place. And I can tell you, I'm on top of all of the caseloads. Any cases that come to my office, we make sure that we act on them. And certainly with the COVID-19 emergency grants, we have distributed those to many civil society organizations to help with these very real problems of poverty alleviation.
For St. Albert.
Given the fact that we know both Asian income support benefits are well below the established poverty line in Canada, we know poverty negatively affects individuals and community health. Given the fact that this minister has failed for 2 years to introduce any poverty reduction strategies whatsoever, Minister, clearly you are expected to toe the party line and read the spin on the paper, but seriously, are you comfortable knowing that your failures are directly causing homelessness, food insecurity, anxiety, pain?
Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows very well that what she's saying is absolutely untrue, and she is fanning the flames of fear and anxiety amongst the community, and she very well also knows how much money we have given in emergency supports to civil society organizations. So if she wants to ask a question, ask a legitimate question. I just did.
Order, order. The honourable member for Sherwood Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2019, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls published its final report. This proved to be a pivotal day for our province as the information released by this report showed the devastating consequences of the violence against Indigenous women across Canada and in Alberta. Our government recognized that these atrocities must be stopped. To the Minister of Indigenous Relations, what impact has the report had on your policy decisions, and what steps are being taken to ensure this violence is stopped?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. As the Minister of Indigenous Relations, I did attend the release of the National Inquiry into Missing, Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, the final report, Reclaiming Power and Place, in June of 2019, and it was life-altering. I listened to and met with families and survivors whose lives changed forever due to the violence and the murder. I vowed then that Alberta's government would be tireless in its commitment to end violence against Indigenous women and girls, the two-spirited LGBTQIA+, and to achieve this goal, Alberta placed Indigenous peoples at the heart of our efforts.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. Given that today marks the release of the National Action Plan to help protect the safety of vulnerable Indigenous peoples, and given that this has been a joint effort between all provinces and territories alongside Alberta's joint working group on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, to the Minister, can you tell this House some of the stakeholders and interest groups you have met with in order to contribute to the formation of this plan?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member again. In March of 2020, Alberta established the Alberta Joint Working Group on Missing, Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, and one of the co-chairs was actually with us today. It was made up of 4 Indigenous women and 3 members of our Legislative Assembly. The Indigenous members have personal and professional knowledge about the realities that leave Indigenous women and girls, the two-spirited LGBTQIA+ people, vulnerable to violence in Alberta. The MLAs are strong committed to creating a safer society for Indigenous people.
Member for Sherwood Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks again to the Minister. Given that the National Action Plan is great news for Alberta's Indigenous communities because it lays out concrete steps to protect their vulnerable peoples, and given that this is only one step on a long path towards reconciliation, to the same Minister, how will this action plan protect vulnerable Indigenous peoples, and what concrete actions will be taken in the near future to ensure that this happens?
The Honourable the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank you for the question. Alberta immediately acted in response to the National Inquiry's report, particularly on critical matters, including violence prevention, raising awareness about violence prevention, and standing against violence towards Indigenous women, girls, and the two-spirited LGBTQIA+ people. Actions included the following: declared October 4th, 2019 and 2020 as Sisters in Spirit Day to honor the memory and awareness of missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls and their families. And if you go to the federal building, we still have the regalia address there, thanks to the Speaker. Thank you so much for that. We entered into a 5-year contribution agreement with the Institute for the Advancement of Indigenous
Honourable
Women.
members, a point of order was noted, but not mentioned by the Speaker at 2:25. The Honourable Member, or the Deputy Opposition House Leader raised that point of order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview is next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, Emphasis announced they're expanding their operation to Calgary. This is great news for Calgary and great news for Alberta. Now, I know deals like this one and the one with Infosys take years, so I'd like to thank all the entrepreneurs, Calgary Economic Development, the City of Calgary, the U of C, and the entire innovation ecosystem for their hard work on bringing these companies here. To the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, did Emphasis receive any funding or incentives from the provincial government or any Crown corporation, including Invest Alberta?
The Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to that member for the question. I must say it's refreshing to see the NDP welcome investment into Alberta. Last time when we had another one of these announcements, Mr. Speaker, I think it took them like 3 to 6 months, Mr. Speaker, before they said boo about it. So honestly, thank you for that collaboration. We do have an emerging tech sector in Alberta, Mr. Speaker, that is maturing rapidly. We're seeing rapid growth in this, Mr. Speaker. Right now, we're working through with the University of Calgary on their Quantum City strategy, Mr. Speaker, and making sure we have the talent pipeline in Alberta to make sure we can fulfill all of these job commitments that are coming into our province.
The Honourable Member for the Beverly-Clareview.
Given I just asked if they received any provincial tax dollars. Now, given the CEO of Emphasis was on the radio this morning, and he was asked if his company received any incentives to expand here. He admitted he did, but he refused to disclose the details. Alberta taxpayers deserve to know. How much did Emphasis receive in funding or tax breaks or other financial incentives from the Government of Alberta, any of its Crown corporations, including Invest Alberta?
The Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, Emphasis did not receive any tax credits or any other incentives in that direction, Mr. Speaker. They are working, though, with the University of Calgary on their quantum strategy, Mr. Speaker, and we're working through with the University of Calgary right now to make sure that we have the right talent pipeline coming in here in Alberta to make sure that we can fulfill all of these new jobs that are coming into the province of Alberta.
Will the Member for Edmonton Beverly-Clareview.
Thank you. They didn't get any tax credits because he canceled them all. Given that the Premier promised in the last election that all he had to do was hand over $4.7 billion to profitable corporations and jobs and investment would come flooding in. And given that investment actually dropped, our economy stalled and 50,000 jobs were lost before the pandemic. Given that the UCP have accelerated this failed policy, which hasn't created a single job. To the Minister, why would any additional incentives be needed to attract companies if the UCP's corporate tax cut worked?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, sometimes the NDP throw up a big beach ball, so it's time to hit this one out of the park, Mr. Speaker. 1,200 jobs when the NDP, 1,200 companies in the tech sector when the NDP were in. 3,000 right now in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. But not only do we have more, these are bigger companies, Mr. Speaker. We're now attracting Canadian head offices for major international tech sector companies, Mr. Speaker. That's happened under this United Conservative government, not under the NDP, Mr. Speaker. In the first quarter of this year, Mr. Speaker, we doubled the best year under the NDP. 3 months, 12 months, double what they ever did.
The Honourable Member for Order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
Yesterday afternoon, the Health Minister quietly released his new supervised consumption licensing scheme, which includes a new requirement for Albertans seeking life-saving services to produce Alberta Health Number. Research from the University of Alberta shows that when people seeking supervised consumption services are required to produce ID, as many as 2/3 of them will simply use substances somewhere else, putting themselves and their community at risk. Has the minister read this research, and why is he trying to reduce the number of Albertans using these life-saving services?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just so that I completely understand, the honourable member is advocating against quality standards for consumption service sites? Is that what we're being asked here? The consumption services in Calgary and throughout the province are going to remain an important part of our addiction and mental health system. And it spans prevention, it's reducing harm, it's treatment, it's recovery, and these quality standards are going to improve services, increase integration with the healthcare system, and improve community safety.
Now the Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
Given that 4 Albertans die of a preventable overdose every single day due to this minister's mishandling of the crisis, and given that the soaring death toll is due in part to his malicious closure of supervised consumption services in Lethbridge and Edmonton, and soon Calgary as well, isn't it true that this so-called licensing scheme creates yet another barrier to care to satisfy the Premier's personal prejudice against the science of harm reduction?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Not at all, Mr. Speaker. As stated in the new guidelines, pathways to recovery should encourage warm handoffs when it's possible. And as was quoted in the Calgary Herald, MJ, who is a 33-year-old Albertan with addiction, said, quote, having an introduction where people help you get into a program, I think will help a lot of people, end quote. Again, I'm at a loss as to why the NDP don't want to increase access to healthcare, the healthcare system for vulnerable Albertans who are suffering from addiction.
Well, member for Edmonton Riverview.
Given that it's been a week since the minister admitted he will be closing the only supervised consumption site in Calgary at the Sheldon Schumer Centre, and given that the minister claims he plans to provide these services in 2 other locations, will the minister tell Calgarians where these locations are and when they will be operational? Why the secrets? It looks like the UCP don't actually have a plan at all, at least not one that's going to save people's lives.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. In her preamble, she even just admitted that we do have a plan. It's to expand. She admitted that we were expanding services in Calgary. She admitted that we're opening 2 other sites in Calgary. Look, they want to create fear, and they're smearing this plan. They're trying to claim that requiring a personal health care number is somehow damaging or wrong. It's some more fear. It's more fear-mongering from the NDP. Addiction services are health care, Mr. Speaker, and asking for a personal health number is part of the effort to connect clients to other health care services throughout the province, integrating consumption services with the health care system.
The Honourable Member for Brooks Medicine Hat has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's add some positivity to the discussion. Over the last year, agriculture has been a bright light in all of our lives. From record yields and strong crop prices to an $815 million investment into irrigation in southern Alberta, farmers and ranchers continue to drive our economic recovery. Despite weather that hits southern Alberta, I have heard that 2021 is off to an even better start. In the desert of Brooks Medicine Hat, we always appreciate moisture in whatever forms it comes, and especially during seeding. So to the Minister, after a banner year for agriculture in 2020, how is Plant 21 shaping up right now?
The Honourable Minister of Service Alberta has risen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. And thank you also to the hardworking farmers all across the province who have gotten Plant 21 off to a great start. With favorable conditions, Plant 21 is already more than 90% complete, and that is ahead of both the 5-year and 10-year averages of 78% and 82% respectively. So with that, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge again and thank all the farmers and ranchers who work day and night to put food on all of our tables for so many Albertans, Canadians, and folks all around the world.
Honourable Member for Brooks Medicine Hat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Farmers and ranchers are the backbone of our economy, and I'm so proud to represent the families who have worked so hard for generations to feed Alberta and the nation. Given that Plant 21 is off to an even better start than 2020, which saw record exports and crop prices, and given that demand for our high-quality, safe food will only continue to grow, to the Minister, our products are sought after around the world. What is being done to ensure that farmers and ranchers have access to global markets?
The order. The Honourable Minister for Service Alberta is the only one with the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member is right when talking about how important exports are to the agriculture sector. And that's why our government is committed to expanding existing market access while also finding new export opportunities for Alberta's farmers and ranchers. One of the ways we are doing this is by doubling Agriculture and Forestry's international presence and by having more boots on the ground promoting both our high-quality products and selling Alberta as one of the most attractive places to invest. We are opening up opportunities not just for our ag sector, but all sectors.
The Honourable Member for Brooks Medicine Hat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With 80% of food products grown in Alberta exported, market access is critical to the success of our ag sector and my constituents. But given that adding value to these raw products will result in economic growth and further diversification of our economy, something that we welcome, and given that 2021 is shaping to be another great year for our ag sector, where we will see strong yields and even stronger prices, what is our minister doing to attract value-added processing to Alberta to get an even better return on our world-renowned products?
The Honourable Minister of Service Alberta.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank again to the member for such a great question. Our government is committed to attracting value-added investment into our agriculture sector. We know how important that is. And less than 2 years ago, the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry announced his $1.4 billion value-added investment strategy, and it has been incredibly successful so far. To date, it has already attracted $932 million in sectors such as plant protein, canola processing, agri-tech, and new and emerging sectors. These investments will create nearly 2,200 jobs, which is more than the initial goal of 2,000. This is another strong year for ag, Mr. Speaker. We're proud.
The honourable member for Vermilion Lloydminster Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently in this chamber, we've heard many baseless accusations about the Alberta's coal policy and how we are allegedly destroying the environment in our protected areas. Members on the opposite side of the House know full well that their accusations are without a shred of merit. Our government is committed to a thoughtful approach to our coal policy, which balances the need for a strong environmental protections and economic development. To the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Transportation, can you please clear up the misinformation out there regarding our coal policy?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Municipal Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, Alberta's government reinstated the coal policy after listening to Albertans. Since then, an independent coal policy committee has been appointed and is focused on how the province can manage coal resources and development. Consultations are focused on coal policy. I would encourage all Albertans to share their views about how coal development may impact them in their environment. Mr. Speaker, I would say not only do we want to hear from Albertans, we need to hear from Albertans.
Order. The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. Given that, as you mentioned, the Independent Coal Policy Committee, which represents a wide range of perspectives on coal development, has been established to lead a comprehensive public engagement to capture the views of all Albertans. And given that your views will inform the province's long-term approach to coal, to the same Minister, can you please update the Legislature on the status of the committee's ongoing consultations?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The committee is holding a number of meetings with individuals, groups, and other interested people who are actively involved in discussions around coal. The purpose of the meetings are to build on the initial survey and gather feedback on how best to structure the engagement. The final report is due to the Minister of Energy on November 15, 2021, and she will carefully consider the recommendations before proceeding. Our goal is to ensure government's approach to coal development reflects the best interest of Albertans and continues to balance the environment and great protections with enabling responsible resource development.
The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the Minister. Given that direct engagement with our Indigenous communities is also critical in the development of our coal policy, and given that alongside the committee-led engagement, the Minister of Energy will directly engage Indigenous communities to ensure their perspectives on coal development are heard and considered in the development of a new coal policy. And given that the Indigenous people are welcome to participate in the committee-led engagement process, to the same Minister, what steps are being taken to ensure their perspectives on coal are heard and considered in the development of the new coal policy?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Alberta Energy is arranging a number of regional meetings with First Nations and Métis communities with invitations to each session organized generally based on regional location. These sessions will be virtual due to COVID-19 public health measures. Following these initial multi-community meetings, Energy will also meet with any Indigenous community that requests further engagement. Mr. Speaker, Indigenous interests will always be highly regarded within our government, and we will listen carefully to those Indigenous leaders and communities.
Honourable members, this concludes the time allotted for oral question period. In 30 seconds or less, we will continue with the remainder of the daily routine. Encourage all members, if they're traveling home to their constituencies today, to do so safely.
Good job, Rick. You had like every file over there today, buddy. Well, it's a light day. I was getting worried there for a minute.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
The The honourable member for Calgary West.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As chair of the Standing Committee on Private Bills, Private Members, Public Bills, I'm pleased to table the committee's final report on Bill 217, Polish-Canadian Heritage Day Act, sponsored by the honourable member for Peace River. This bill was referred to the committee on May 27, 2021. Mr. Speaker, the report recommends that Bill 217 proceed. I request concurrence of the Assembly in the final report on Bill 217. Thank you.
Members, the chair of the Standing Committee on Private Members, Private Bills has requested concurrence in the report on Bill 217, Polish-Canadian Heritage Day Act. This is a debatable motion pursuant to Standing Order 18.1b. Are there any members who wish to speak to concurrence? Seeing none, the chair of the Standing Committee, Private Bills and Public Bills, has requested concurrence on Bill 217, Polish-Canadian Heritage Day Act. Does the Assembly concur in the report? If so, please say aye. Aye. If there is opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Presenting petitions.
The honourable member for Edmonton Glenora has a petition to present.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to table a petition containing 11,807 signatures from everyday Albertans from all across this province, calling on the Government of Alberta to redraft its proposed K-6 curriculum. Given that it was a pre-approved formal petition, this is a single copy of these individual signatures gathered by thousands of volunteers. I think we should honour them and their call to scrap the curriculum.
Motions. Introduction of bills.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning has an introduction of a bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise and request leave to introduce a bill, the Workers' Compensation Expanding Presumptive Coverage Amendment Act. The Workers' Compensation Expanding Presumptive Coverage Amendment Act seeks to provide the workers who have been on the front lines since day one of the pandemic the peace of mind they deserve. If passed, this bill would provide presumptive coverage or COVID-19 workers' compensation coverage for essential workers and anyone whose workplace was in outbreak or status when the worker contracted COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, this presumption would ensure that treatments and support start right away. For long-haul sufferers, this bill would ensure the certainty they need throughout a long and difficult recovery. It would also ensure that families who have lost a loved one due to COVID-19 in the workplace receive the compensation they need and deserve to rebuild their lives. Additionally, this bill would reinstate the presumptive PTSD coverage for all workers in Alberta. The removal of this presumptive coverage came right at the onset of the pandemic that has resulted in workplace trauma for countless essential workers who now have to relive that trauma to fight for coverage they deserve. Finally, the bill, if passed, this bill would be retroactive to March 20th, 2020 to ensure Alberta workers currently fighting for WCB coverage can get back to work and back to the healing process. After all, our essential workers, nurses, and long-term care workers, grocery workers, social workers, and firefighters, and so many more have done such a great service for Albertans, and they deserve the appreciation.
Thank you for that very thorough introduction of Bill 219. The honourable members for Edmonton Manning has moved first reading of Bill 219, Workers' Compensation Expanding Presumptive Coverage Amendment Act 2021. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? If so, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Workers' Compensation Expanding Presumptive Coverage Amendment Act 2021 is now read a first time.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to ask for consent of the Chamber to revert back quickly to notices of motion.
Honourable members, the Honourable the Government House Leader has made a request for unanimous consent to revert to notice of motions. I will ask only one question. Is there anyone opposed to providing unanimous consent? If so, please indicate now. Consent is granted. Notice of motions. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the official opposition for that. I rise to give oral notice of Government Motion 83, sponsored by the Honourable the Premier. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly determine, pursuant to Section 3 of the Referendum Act, the following as the question to be put to electors at a referendum, and to which the response from the elector who votes in that referendum must be either yes or no. And the question, should Section 36(2) of the Constitution Act 1982, Parliament and the Government of Canada's commitment to the principle of making equalization payments be removed from the Constitution?
And reports.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning has a tabling, followed by the member for Cypress Medicine Hat.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be quick. This morning I referenced an article titled Alberta Premier Dissolves Government Power Line Opponents Hopeful. I referenced a couple of quotes from the article, and so I will have the requisite copies to table this afternoon.
Hat.
Speaker, I have seven tablings. Last night, during debate on Bill 51, the Citizens Initiative Act, the Honourable Premier joined us in the legislature, and a significant amount of the debate revolved around bills that he had supported and helped produce in the 1990s. The discussion and the debate seemed to be around whether it was qualified by turnout, more achievable for Albertans, or a percentage of the electorate, like Bill 51 has been drafted. Mr. Speaker, I have the three bills from the 1990s, including 1994 Bill 203, which is clearly 10% of turnout was the qualification. My second tabling, 1996, Bill 210. Again, 10% of turnout is clearly the qualification. Mr. Speaker, my third tabling from 1998, Bill 216, again, 10% of the total votes cast, 10% of the turnout was clearly the designation and the qualification used. Mr. Speaker, last night we talked a considerable amount about UCP policy number 27.
Sorry, honourable member, we're tabling documents. We don't need context of when it may or may not have been debated in the House. If you can tell us what the document is, table it, that would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. UCP members wanted lower thresholds. Policy 27 approves that. UCP grassroots guarantee signed by the Premier before he was Premier, giving the grassroots say. Next, I got the UCP platform from this last election, allowing all MLAs free votes unless it's deemed a vote of confidence. And lastly, I have a picture of the Premier, ministers, and up to 8 people dining with white linen and alcohol at the Sky Palace yesterday. Thank you very much.
Much better in the second half of your tabling. Is there others?
Deferred divisions.
Honourable members, we are at points of order. And at 2:25, the Deputy Opposition House Leader rose on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise pursuant to Standing Order 23, H, I, and J as well. And I do not have the benefit of blues, but that was the question where my colleague from St. Albert was asking a question about change in policy of the government, recent change in December. And the Minister of Community and Social Services went on to say that, specifically pointing out the member, that what she said is untrue. And then she went on to say that she's fanning the flames of anxiety, something on those lines, which to me is clearly imputing false motive to the honourable member from St. Albert, who was clearly asking about a recent policy change which has resulted in more bureaucracy for people accessing those benefits, which has resulted in less benefits for those who are accessing those benefits, and that's on top of the department pausing the indexing of those benefits. So those questions were pretty legitimate around the policy change that this minister made, and suggesting that she was fanning the flames of anxiety of imputing any false motive. I think that's offside these standing orders in this House.
Deputy Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, it is obvious that that was a matter of debate. I don't have the benefit of the blues, but Mr. Speaker, I was very close to the Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services in response to a question that on an accusation that she has reduced the income support supplement. And the Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services was just pointing out that in 2018, that there was a ministerial order issued by the members opposite while they were in government. and was simply pointing out that that was an untrue statement, that she was no in any way imputing a false motive on that honourable member from St. Albert. So I think in the end, Mr. Speaker, this is a matter of debate.
Honourable members, I am prepared to rule. I do have the benefit of the blues, and I would say that on this particular occasion, you are both correct in that portions of this statement that the Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services made are, in fact, a matter of debate, including whether or not the Honourable Member for St. Albert was fanning the flames of fear and or not. But one thing is that isn't a matter of debate is when the Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services said, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows very well that what she is saying is absolutely untrue. And the member will know that accusing another member of a deliberate falsehood violates the rules of this assembly. And for that portion of the point of order, she will be encouraged to apologize and withdraw.
I apologize and withdraw.
This matter dealt with and concluded. Orders of the day, orders du jour.
Government bills and orders for second reading. Bill 72, Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act. Adjourned debate. Honourable Mr. Schweitzer.
Honourable members, we are on Bill 72 at second reading. Is there anyone wishing to provide additional comments? Seeing none, I am prepared to call the question or allow the Honourable Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation to close debate. Honourable members, having heard the question as proposed by the Honourable Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation on second reading of Bill 72, Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act, all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered, and a division has been called. Call in the members.
Honourable members. Honourable member for Lacombe-Panoka. Honourable members, a division has been called on second reading of Bill 72, Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act. All those in favour, please stand.
Honourable Mr. Wilson, the Honourable Mr. Luan, the Honourable Mr. Hunter, the Honourable Mr. Glubish, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Getson, the Honourable Mrs. Sawney, the Honourable Ms. Pond, Mr. Ellis, the Honourable Minister Lagrange, Ms. Goodridge, Mr. Guthrie, Mr. Turton, Ms. Glasgow, Ms. Rosen, the Honourable Mr. Madhu, Mr. Orr, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Walker, Mr. Yao, Ms. Gray, Member Phillips, Member Ceci, Mr. Dack, Mr. Stephan, Mr. Singh, Mr. Williams, Member Loyola, Mr. Fian, Mr. Rain, Member Hoffman, pardon me. Correction, Member Hoffman.
Any in the chamber opposed to the motion? Seeing none, we will now go online alphabetically by first name? Last name. When you hear your name, please unmute your mic, state your vote loudly and clearly, either for or against, and then remute your mic once your vote has been cast.
Mr. Amory.
Agree.
Mr. Horner.
Agree.
Ms. Isaac.
In favor.
Mr. Jones.
In favor.
Mr. Long.
In favor.
Ms. Lovely.
Agree.
Mr. Yassine.
For.
Are there any members that have not cast a vote that have not been called? Hearing none.
Madam Speaker, total for the motion 37, total against nil.
That is so carried.
Bill 72, Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act, is now read a second time. Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 57, Métis Settlements Amendment Act 2021, adjourn debate. Honourable Mr. Schweitzer.
Any members wishing to join the debate? Seeing none, I like this afternoon. Would the Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations like to close debate? All right. The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations has moved third reading of Bill 57, Métis Settlement Amendment Act 2021. Those in favour of the motion for third reading, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. That is carried. A division has been called. Members wishing to vote, please join online. Ring the bells. Very much. Honourable members, a division has been called on third reading of Bill 57, the Métis Settlement Amendment Act 2021. Those in favour, please, in the chamber, please stand.
The Honourable Mr. Wilson, the Honourable Mr. Luan, Honourable Mr. Hunter, the Honourable Mr. Glubish, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Getson, the Honourable Mrs. Sawney, the Honourable Ms. Pond, Mr. Ellis, the Honourable Minister LaGrange, Ms. Glasgow, Mr. Guthrie, Mr. Turton, Ms. Rosen, pardon me, correction, the Honourable Mr. Madhu, Mr. Orr, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Walker, Mr. Stephan, Mr. Singh.
Those in the chamber opposed, please stand.
Ms. Gray, Member Hoffman, Member Ceci, Mr. Dack, Mr. Loyola, or Member Loyola, Mr. Fian.
We will now go to those joining us on Microsoft Teams, starting alphabetically by last name. When you hear your name called, please unmute your mic and speak loudly and clearly, either for or against, and then remute your mic.
Mr. Amory.
In favor.
Mr. Godfrey.
For.
Mr. Horner.
In favor.
Ms. Isaac.
In favor.
Mr. Jones.
In favor.
Mr. Long.
In favor.
Ms. Lovely.
In favor.
Mr. Yassin.
For.
Are there any members that have not been able to cast a vote? Please proceed.
Madam Speaker, total for the motion, 28, total against, 6.
Members, that is carried.
Bill 57, Métis Settlements Amendment Act 2021 is now read a third time. Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 68, Election Statutes Amendment Act 2021. Adjourned debate, Ms. Ganley.
The honourable member for Calgary Mountain View? Okay, are there any other members wishing to speak to third reading of Bill 68, the Election Statutes Amendment Act 2021? Shall I call the question? Are all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. A division has been called. Clear the lobbies. Honourable members, a division has been called on third reading of Bill 68, the Election Statutes Amendment Act 2021. For those members wishing to vote remotely, please join the Microsoft Teams meeting and keep your cameras on at all times. All those in favor of Bill 68 for third reading, please rise.
The Honourable Mr. Wilson, the Honourable Mr. Luan, the Honourable Mr. Hunter, the Honourable Mr. McIver, the Honourable Mr. Glubish, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Getson, the Honourable Mrs. Sawney, the Honourable Ms. Pond, Mr. Ellis, the Honourable Minister LaGrange, Ms. Goodridge, Mrs. Pitt, Mr. Guthrie, Mr. Turton, Ms. Rosen, the Honourable Mr. Madhu, Mr. Orr, Mr. Rosewell, Mr. Yao, Mr. Walker, Mr. Singh, Mr. Stephan, and Mr. Williams.
Honourable members, all those in the chamber opposed to Bill 68, please rise.
Ms. Gray, Member Hoffman, Member Ceci, Mr. Dack, Member Loyola, Mr. Fian.
We will now do a roll call alphabetically by last name of those members who are participating remotely. When you hear your name being called, please unmute your mic, state your name, and loudly and clearly for or against the motion. Once you finish voting, please remute your mic. Remember to leave your cameras on at all times.
Mr. Godfrey.
For.
Mr. Horner.
In favor?
Ms. Isaac.
In favor?
Mr. Jones.
In favor?
Mr. Long.
In favor?
Ms. Lovely.
In favor.
Mr. Yassin.
For.
If you did not hear your name called, please unmute your mic now and identify yourself to be recognized to vote.
Madam Speaker, total for the motion 31, total against 6.
That motion is carried.
Bill 68, Election Statutes Amendment Act 2021 is now read a third time. Under Government Bills and Orders for third reading, Bill 62, Red Tape Reduction Implementation Act 2021. Honourable Mr. Hunter.
The Honourable Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to move third reading of Bill 62, the Red Tape Reduction Implementation Act 2021. Bill 62 represents our continued steps toward making Alberta the freest and fastest moving economy in North America. I want to thank all members for the robust discussion and fulsome debate on the changes we have brought forward in this legislation. They show our commitment to reducing the regulatory burden on our job creators and everyday Albertans. Now, as we work to recover economically, we must continue to create a climate in our province that encourages investment and supports job creation. One of the best things we can do to achieve that is to reduce red tape. I want to once again emphasize that this should not be a partisan issue, Madam Speaker. Cutting red tape is just good common sense. BC, for example, took this seriously and continues to this day to take this seriously under this current government. The changes proposed in Bill 62 will cut red tape by streamlining, eliminating, and modernizing outdated or redundant regulatory requirements. Some examples of this include supporting the construction industry by establishing clear rules for the adjudication process and clarifying the types of projects and professions to which Alberta's prompt payment rules will apply. Expanding Travel Alberta's mandate, giving the agency a more active role in working directly with communities, businesses, and entrepreneurs to develop new tourism destinations, products, and experiences in Alberta. Harmonizing Alberta security laws with other Canadian jurisdictions, enhancing existing protections for investors, and expanding opportunities for companies to raise capital more efficiently in Alberta. This bill will provide needed certainty to job creators with the most impactful amendments designed to encourage investment and economic growth. If passed, Bill 62 would create greater efficiencies, faster approvals, and save both time and money for our job creators when they need it most. I think we can all agree that is a positive step forward. It's not just dollars that these changes are saving, they also save Albertans, industry, and government something just as important, time. And as the old adage goes, time is money. If passed, these changes will add to the many red tape reduction initiatives already implemented or approved by our government. I'm proud of the progress we've made to reduce red tape by more than 16% so far. Madam Speaker, that's over 108,000 hoops that Albertans do not have to jump through anymore. We know there's more to do, but we're ready for the task. I'd like to thank the Chamber once again for the thoughtful discussion and support for the bill, and I look forward to continue bringing legislation forward that reduces and eliminates unnecessary red tape in the province. And with that, Madam Speaker, I would like to adjourn debate.
We have the motion to adjourn debate. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do want to thank all members of the Assembly for their work today. With that, Madam Speaker, I move that the Assembly be adjourned until 1:30 p.m., Monday, June 7th, 2021.
Having heard that motion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. House stands adjourned until Monday, 1:30.